The 1950s weren't just about rock and roll and drive-ins. They were the decade when Hollywood cracked open the vault of imagination and filled American screens with radioactive giants, paranoid invaders, and rocket ships built from plywood and dreams. Some of these films became cult legends. Others were forgotten in dusty reels, waiting for rediscovery. But what if I told you that these lost movies still echo through modern sci-fi? Let's see which ones shaped everything that followed. Rocket Ship, XM 1950. Before America even landed on the moon in film fantasy, there was Rocket Ship XM. Rushed into theaters to beat George Powell's Destination Moon, this low-budget marvel became the first American movie to take audiences into deep space. Shot in just 18 days and cobbled together with borrowed sets, it looks crude by modern standards, but its ideas were anything but small. The film follows a crew meant to reach the moon, only to be thrown off course to Mars. What they find there isn't shiny domes or advanced technology, but a ruined civilization destroyed by atomic war. Remember, this was 1950, just 5 years after Hiroshima. The idea that advanced beings could obliterate themselves with nuclear weapons struck audiences like a thunderclap. Suddenly, space wasn't just about adventure, it was a mirror reflecting Earth's own terrors. Critics often dismissed Rocket Ship XM as a cheap knockoff, but look closer. Its story foreshadowed countless sci-fi cautionary tales, where explorers confront the fallout of their own technology. Films like Planet of the Apes and even later episodes of Star Trek owe something to this template of discovery laced with dread. It may not have had glossy effects, but Rocket Ship XM planted a seed, the notion that science fiction could warn us as much as it could entertain. For a movie stitched together with little money and big ambition, it ended up shaping a generation of cosmic paranoia. Destination, Moon 1950. If Rocket Ship XM was the rebel, then Destination Moon was the establishment. Backed by George Powell, and with technical advice from actual rocket experts, this was the first serious big-budget American film to show space travel as something achievable. No monsters, no Martians, no ray guns. Just men, machines, and the unrelenting challenge of physics. The plot seems simple today. 4 men risk everything on the first flight to the moon. But in 1950, when space travel still felt like science fantasy, this was a revelation. Using meticulous miniatures and stunning technicolor, Powell gave audiences a vision of rockets, lunar landings, and spacesuits that felt eerily predictive of what NASA would actually accomplish 2 decades later. Sure, it's stiff in places. The characters talk like engineers giving a lecture, and the patriotic overtones are impossible to miss. But that doesn't erase its impact. Destination Moon won the Academy Award for special effects and kickstarted America's obsession with realistic sci-fi. Without it, movies like 2001, A Space Odyssey might have had a much harder time convincing studios that audiences wanted serious space exploration stories. Critics sometimes call it dry, but let's be honest, it's the dry that makes it legendary. It set a standard. Powell wasn't selling a fantasy, he was selling a future that America could almost touch. And for audiences in the shadow of the Cold War, that was more thrilling than any bug-eyed monster. Red Planet Mars, 1952. Now, here's a strange one. Red Planet Mars doesn't have mutants or giant spiders. Instead, it offers one of the oddest premises of the decade. What if humanity started getting radio messages from Mars? Not friendly greetings, not invasion threats, but cryptic statements that turned Earth upside down. The film follows scientists who discover they can communicate with Martians. Soon, these alien messages begin shaping world governments, destabilizing power balances, and sparking widespread panic. The Martians never appear on screen, but their unseen influence drives the story. It's less about little green men and more about what happens when humans believe in voices from the void. Shot on a modest budget and mostly confined to laboratories and offices, the movie plays more like a thriller than a traditional sci-fi romp. But its ideas were wildly ahead of their time. The notion that unseen information could alter nations echoes modern anxieties about propaganda, mass media, and unseen forces guiding human behavior. Critics at the time were baffled, dismissing it as too talky and implausible. But Red Planet Mars deserves credit for showing that science fiction didn't always need rubber monsters or ray guns. It could be unsettling simply by asking, what if we weren't the only voice in the universe? And what if that voice had more control over us than we'd like to admit? It may not have the spectacle of Forbidden Planet, but in its quiet way, Red Planet Mars laid groundwork for the psychological side of science fiction. Invaders from Mars, 1953. If you want to know what paranoia looks like through the eyes of a child, Invaders from Mars delivers it in Technicolor nightmares. Released in 1953, this movie wasn't just another alien invasion flick. It was told entirely from a young boy's perspective, and that makes it unforgettable. The story follows a boy who watches a flying saucer land behind his house. Soon, he notices strange behavior in his parents, neighbors, and even the police. They're being controlled by the aliens through a device implanted in their necks. For a kid in the 1950s, the horror wasn't just monsters. It was the idea that the people you trusted most could suddenly turn against you. Shot on sound stages with minimal sets, the film leaned heavily into dreamlike visuals, long, empty hallways, repetitive structures, surreal lighting. Everything felt slightly off, like a nightmare you can't wake up from. Critics didn't know what to make of it, but later filmmakers took notes. The eerie style influenced directors from Tobe Hooper to Steven Spielberg, whose Close Encounters of the Third Kind shares some of its DNA. Yes, the aliens themselves look like actors in rubber suits, but the atmosphere is what sticks. Invaders from Mars proved that science fiction could scare by bending reality, not just by showing monsters. It's a child's fear turned into cinema, and in doing so, it left a mark on generations of storytellers who realized the scariest invasions often start at home. It came from outer space, 1953. Here's a twist most people didn't see coming in 1953. Aliens who aren't here to conquer, but to survive. It came from outer space, shot in 3D and based on a story by Ray Bradbury, dared to break from the usual evil invader mold, and that made it unforgettable. The film opens with a UFO crash in the Arizona desert. Locals panic as people start behaving strangely, but the reveal isn't what audiences expected. The aliens are stranded, trying to repair their ship, and they're only impersonating humans to avoid detection. They're not monsters, they're survivors. This was a radical idea at the time. Most 1950s sci-fi played to Cold War fears of infiltration and destruction, but Bradbury's script suggested something deeper. Maybe fear blinds us, and maybe the real danger is how humans react to what they don't understand. The movie's desert landscapes, eerie theremin score, and haunting 3D effects gave it a surreal, otherworldly feel. Audiences loved the spectacle, but it was the empathy for the aliens that made it resonate. Critics noticed too. Some called it the first thinking man's alien invasion movie. Looking back, you can see its fingerprints on everything from Star Trek's misunderstood alien episodes to Arrival decades later. It came from outer space showed that science fiction didn't have to be about blasting creatures out of the sky. Sometimes the bravest story was one that asked, what if they weren't the enemy after all? Robot Monster, 1953. Let's be honest, if you've ever seen a list of the worst movies ever made, Robot Monster is probably on it. And yet, here we are, talking about it as one of the most unforgettable sci-fi relics of the 1950s. Why? Because even with a budget of barely $16,000, this movie dared to take on ideas far bigger than its gorilla suit and diving helmet could deliver. The villain is Roman, an alien agent in a shaggy gorilla body wearing a space helmet. His mission? Wipe out humanity. The plot is pure pulp. Survivors hide in caves, romance stomps around Griffith Park, and bubble machines fill in for alien technology. It's cheap, clumsy, and bizarre, and yet strangely captivating. Audiences laughed, critics groaned, but Robot Monster became a midnight movie legend. Why? Because buried under the goofy visuals was a genuine attempt to deal with annihilation, loneliness, and survival. Roman himself, despite his laughable appearance, delivers lines about longing for connection, about being torn between duty and desire. Imagine that. A gorilla-suited alien complaining about isolation decades before Hollywood made it fashionable. Sure, it's campy. Sure, it looks like a high school play gone wrong, but Robot Monster has something most polished studio pictures lack: sincerity. Director Phil Tucker believed in his vision, however absurd it looked on screen. And that sincerity, mixed with unintentional comedy, turned the film into a cult classic. It may not have inspired future filmmakers in the traditional sense, but Robot Monster proved that ambition doesn't always need money. Sometimes it only takes a guy in a furry suit and the sheer will to tell a story bigger than your budget. Catwoman of the Moon, 1953. The title alone feels like a comic book fever dream, Catwoman of the Moon. But this 1953 drive-in staple, produced for pennies, actually touched on themes that Hollywood would recycle again and again. The idea of a hidden society waiting for human explorers. A crew lands on the moon, only to discover it isn't barren rock, but home to an ancient race of telepathic women. Clad in black leotards, these cat women live in underground caverns, plotting to escape their dying world by stealing the explorer's ship. On paper, it sounds like disposable pulp. On screen, it became something stranger, part fantasy, part paranoia tale, and part accidental satire of gender politics. For its time, the movie was groundbreaking simply for suggesting the moon wasn't just lifeless dust. Its sets, painted backdrops, and shimmering caverns offered a surreal, theatrical quality that set it apart from other low-budget offerings. Critics dismissed it as silly, but audiences were hooked by the spectacle of a hidden civilization and the tension between human explorers and alien women. The influence is undeniable. Decades later, films like Queen of Outer Space and even modern space operas borrowed the lost female colony trope. And beyond that, the movie captured something deeper. The fear of the unknown combined with a fantasy of discovery. Yes, it's campy. Yes, the dialogue sounds like it was written overnight. But Catwoman of the Moon left its paw prints all over the genre. It showed that even the cheapest sci-fi films could spark imagination. And for that reason, it still deserves a seat in this conversation. Target Earth, 1954. When cities go silent and robots roam the streets, you're looking at the DNA of post-apocalyptic cinema. Target Earth didn't have flashy effects or star power, but its images of deserted downtowns and mechanical invaders burned into the memories of anyone who saw it. The story begins with a woman waking up in Chicago to find the city eerily abandoned. Soon she discovers the truth. Giant robots, controlled by aliens, have invaded Earth. The survivors she meets aren't superheroes or scientists, but ordinary people trying to endure. That's what makes Target Earth so haunting. It's not about winning, it's about surviving when survival feels impossible. The robots themselves look clunky, metallic suits with stiff movements, but the atmosphere is what matters. Empty streets, shadows on skyscrapers, and the crushing silence of a city without people. Those visuals inspired countless films and TV shows, from Invasion of the Body Snatchers to modern zombie apocalypses. Critics at the time shrugged it off as another cheap alien picture, but they missed the point. Target Earth was one of the first films to use an invasion as a backdrop for human drama. The robots might have been the hook, but the real story was about fear, trust, and survival under pressure. Today you can still feel its influence in every story where survivors wander a deserted cityscape, from The Walking Dead to 28 Days Later. Target Earth showed that the scariest thing about the end of the world isn't the monsters. It's being left behind to face them. Them. 1954. Now, this is where atomic age paranoia really started to grow legs. 6 of them, to be exact. Them. Wasn't just another B movie, it was Warner Brothers. First big-budget sci-fi, shot with the care of a serious thriller. The monsters weren't aliens, but something closer to home. Giant ants mutated by nuclear testing. Set in the deserts of New Mexico, the story follows police, scientists, and the military as they uncover tunnels filled with colossal ants. The ants may look primitive by modern standards, but in 1954, they terrified audiences. The sound design alone, that eerie, clicking cry of the insects, was enough to make skin crawl. Unlike many creature features, Them treated its premise seriously. The military strategies, the scientific debates, even the human drama of a little girl traumatized by the attack, all of it added weight. This wasn't camp. This was a warning. Nuclear power might not just end the world in a flash. It could twist nature into horrors we couldn't control. The film was a hit, influencing the entire wave of big bug movies that followed. Tarantula, The Black Scorpion, Beginning of the End. But none matched its intensity or craftsmanship. Them. Proved that science fiction could be a legitimate blockbuster, not just drive-in filler. Looking back, you can see its DNA in everything from Aliens to Godzilla films. It made the simple idea of nature gone wrong into a template for decades of monster cinema. And it all started with ants marching in the desert. This Island Earth, 1955. If the 1950s had a crown jewel of colorful spectacle, it was This Island Earth. With its blazing technicolor, sprawling alien worlds, and the unforgettable Metaluna mutant, it remains one of the most ambitious sci-fi films of the decade. The story follows scientists recruited by mysterious strangers who turn out to be aliens seeking Earth's help in their intergalactic war. What begins as a slow mystery unravels into cosmic conflict, complete with dazzling spaceship battles and the unforgettable reveal of Metaluna, a world under siege. What set This Island Earth apart was its production value. Unlike many quick B pictures, Universal poured serious resources into it. The sets were grand, the effects sophisticated, and the colors breathtaking. For audiences in 1955, it felt like stepping into another galaxy. Sure, critics today might chuckle at the stiff dialogue, but the imagination was undeniable. This Island Earth showed that sci-fi could be big, bold, and visually spectacular, not just guys in suits stomping around sets. Its influence is everywhere, from the colorful alien epics of the 1960s to later homages in shows like Mystery Science Theater 3000, which both mocked and celebrated it. The Metaluna mutant became an icon of 50s sci-fi design, inspiring countless toys, posters, and knockoffs. But the real achievement was in scope. It was one of the first American films to treat interstellar war as cinematic art, paving the way for everything from Star Wars to Star Trek. This Island Earth wasn't just another invasion flick. It was a vision of cosmic wonder, and one that generations of filmmakers never forgot. Creature with the Atom Brain, 1955. If you ever wondered what would happen if gangsters met mad science, Creature with the Atom Brain has your answer. Released in 1955, this Columbia Pictures thriller fused crime drama with atomic age horror in a way no one expected. The result was both pulpy and pioneering. The story follows a mob boss who hires a disgraced scientist to reanimate dead men using atomic energy. The corpses return as near-invincible soldiers, controlled remotely by radio signals, and used for revenge. It's a chilling concept. Gangland assassins reborn as atomic zombies. Long before George Romero made The Walking Dead famous, this movie was already exploring the horror of the reanimated. Shot on a modest budget, the film doesn't have elaborate sets or dazzling effects. Instead, it relies on atmosphere, shadowy laboratories, eerie close-ups of the dead-eyed soldiers, and the unsettling crackle of radio waves commanding human puppets. For 1950s audiences still grappling with the promises and dangers of atomic power, this premise hit hard. Critics at the time called it lurid, even trashy. But the influence is unmistakable. It helped cement the idea that science fiction could merge seamlessly with horror, and that the terror wasn't always from outer space. Sometimes it was born in our own labs and used by our own criminals. Creature with the Atom Brain may not sit at the top of the genre's canon, but it proved that sci-fi could step into darker territory. It wasn't about noble astronauts or alien invaders. It was about corruption, revenge, and the perils of technology in the wrong hands. Themes that would ripple through countless films to come. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. Few films have captured pure paranoia as perfectly as Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Released in 1956 and directed by Don Siegel, this isn't just a sci-fi movie. It's a waking nightmare that still feels uncomfortably relevant. The plot is deceptively simple. In a small California town, people begin to notice their loved ones aren't quite themselves. They look the same, they sound the same, but something essential is missing. The truth: alien pods are replacing humans with emotionless duplicates. On the surface, it's a chilling alien invasion story. But beneath that, the metaphors run deep. For some, it reflected Cold War anxieties about conformity. For others, it was a critique of political witch hunts. Whatever the interpretation, the fear it created was universal: the loss of individuality, the idea that you could vanish while still walking around in your own skin. Shot in black and white with a noir-like tension, the movie feels claustrophobic and relentless. The final scenes, with Kevin McCarthy's desperate cries of, "They're here already," echoing through traffic, became iconic. Unlike many 50s films, there was no neat resolution, only a haunting sense that safety might already be gone. Body Snatchers went on to inspire multiple remakes, from the 1978 masterpiece to 1990s and 2000s reinterpretations. But the original remains unmatched in atmosphere. It showed that science fiction didn't need spectacle to terrify. Sometimes the scariest invasion is the one that looks exactly like your neighbor. Forbidden Planet, 1956. If there's a single 1950s film that set the blueprint for future space epics, it's Forbidden Planet. Released by MGM in 1956, this was no cheap drive-in flick. It was a lavish production with a sweeping story, dazzling effects, and groundbreaking ideas that reshaped sci-fi forever. The plot takes us to Altair 4, where a starship crew investigates a remote colony. There, they encounter Dr. Morbius, his daughter, and the remains of a long-extinct alien civilization called the Krell. The film blends mystery, danger, and wonder, as the crew uncovers technology so advanced it borders on godlike. Visually, it was breathtaking. Vast alien landscapes, futuristic sets, and, of course, Robbie the Robot, who became one of the most enduring icons of sci-fi. The film also pioneered electronic music, creating an eerie, otherworldly soundscape that audiences had never heard before. But what made Forbidden Planet legendary wasn't just spectacle. It was its brainy heart. The story drew inspiration from Shakespeare's The Tempest and tackled themes of human ambition, hidden desires, and the dangers of tampering with power we don't fully understand. These weren't rubber suit monsters. These were monsters of the mind, made terrifyingly real. Forbidden Planet directly inspired Star Trek, influenced Star Wars, and set a standard for serious space cinema. It proved that science fiction could be both grand, entertainment, and intellectual exploration. Decades later, it still feels ahead of its time. The Amazing Colossal Man, 1957. By the late 50s, atomic age anxiety had mutated into one of the strangest subgenres, giant humans, and no film captured that better than The Amazing Colossal Man. Directed by Burt Abai Gordon, the master of oversized monsters, this movie wasn't just camp spectacle, it was tragedy wrapped in sci-fi. The story follows Lieutenant Column Glenn Manning, exposed to a plutonium blast during a weapons test. Instead of dying, he grows uncontrollably, soon towering over buildings. But with size comes pain. His heart can't keep up, his body becomes unstable, and his humanity begins to slip away. Unlike the cheerful superheroes that would dominate later decades, Manning is a tragic figure. His growth isn't a gift, it's a curse. The film leans into the horror of losing control over one's own body, a fear that resonated deeply in an era obsessed with atomic consequences. The effects, by today's standards, look crude: miniatures and split-screen shots of Manning towering over cars and bridges. But the imagery stuck. The sight of a giant, anguished man rampaging through Las Vegas left an impression that outlived its modest production. Critics rolled their eyes, but audiences filled theaters. The film even spawned a sequel, War of the Colossal Beast. More importantly, it planted the seed for countless later stories of accidental giants and the dangers of unchecked science. The Amazing Colossal Man isn't polished, but it's poignant. It's less about destruction and more about watching a man lose himself to forces beyond his control, an allegory that still hits hard today. The Angry Red Planet, 1959. Closing out the decade with a splash of strange color, The Angry Red Planet became one of the most visually distinctive sci-fi films of its time. Released in 1959, it dared to do something different, use a process called cinemagic to bathe its Martian sequences in eerie red tones, making the planet look like a surreal nightmare. The plot sends a crew of astronauts to Mars, where they encounter bizarre creatures, including the now famous rat-bat-spider monster, a freakish blend of puppetry and design that haunted audiences for years. The film's monsters may look strange today, but in 1959, their weirdness felt thrillingly alien. What set the angry red planet apart wasn't just its monsters, but its style. The cinemagic process gave Mars a hallucinatory quality, turning the alien world into something unsettling and unforgettable. While critics mocked it as a gimmick, the technique gave the movie a cult identity and cemented its place in sci-fi history. Beneath the pulp, the story also carried a warning. The Martians are hostile, condemning humanity for its aggression. The message was clear. Earth's violence might follow it into the stars. The angry red planet wasn't a prestige picture, but it was bold. Its visuals, creatures, and color palette influenced a generation of filmmakers who saw that sometimes the weirdest risks create the most lasting images. It was the perfect way to close out the 1950s, strange, daring, and unforgettable. The 1950s gave us flying saucers, radioactive giants, and Martian nightmares. But beneath the rubber suits and miniature sets was something bigger. Imagination with no limits. These 15 films may be forgotten, but their echoes are everywhere, shaping blockbusters we watch today. Which one of these atomic-era gems surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more journeys into cinema's strangest corners. After all, history's hidden reels still have stories left to tell.